So we're here with a few new things in our conversations. We want to keep the momentum going, but we like to start things small and have a look at like what's perhaps working a little bit and how do we want to change things. So for this new batch, hello, we are on video, which seems like a thing that perhaps is valuable to some people for us to also provide as we're chatting away. I guess that means that like people can see our facial expressions and like we can more correctly communicate confusion or body language. So we'll see what that presents. What do you think about our new?
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts on our new?
I think we are continuing to try and evolve the formats to experiment with things and see what resonates. So anytime you can leave comments, anytime you can give a sense of things that particularly resonated, that's helpful for us.
Absolutely.
We're after feedback and we're trying to evolve it.
Sounds great. So today we have a conversation. Our working title for the conversation is Scarcity versus Abundance. And I think this is a topic that, Andy, I feel like you talk about a lot more regularly in conversation and you sort of draw from it and you're tracking a little bit where it sits culturally. And I feel like for me, I kind of have it in my system too as a topic. For thinking fast and slow reference, I have it as a topic, but I don't really have it kind of grokked or in my gut as a thing that I'm like, oh, there's scarcity mindset and there's abundance mindset. And I would like to personally believe that it's because I like to try and focus on an abundance mindset perspective, which might be me saying a nice thing about myself. But I think that it felt like it was a relevant topic and it felt like it would be quite interesting for us to talk about it from the perspective of exploring, I guess, Andy, how you're much more connected with it and how it's feeling relevant. Maybe I might learn something along the way as well.
That sounds exciting. And I think, again, as we've each focused on different value adds in Bellroy and in the world, we have been shaped by the different worlds we focus on and give attention to. And I think for me, scarcity versus abundance has been a theme that has helped me navigate the sustainability, environmental, responsible business space very actively.
Yeah.
There are many times when I'm triggered by, oh, that is a scarcity mindset. And I think one of the things I've really enjoyed is seeing how that lends to system design and creative thinking to break out of a scarcity framing. And I think what we're seeing now is more conversation around these themes in the world at the moment because of certain events, certain key players in the world. We're seeing this theme start to get a little bit more airtime. And I think it's a powerful theme to orient thoughts around and use as a creative path towards better ways.
Because hearing you talk about that from a sustainability perspective, it feels like sustainability content and thinking. And so I guess like content pushes me a little bit to thinking about it from the perspective of something that looks a bit more like greenwashing, and perspectives perhaps is me thinking about it more a little bit like what's actually going on in the world. And when I think about how I think I've seen sustainability and scarcity sort of come together, it's almost like the scarcity drum gets beat really strongly when actually there are ways to think about sustainability from an abundance lens that kind of are not sexy in the world and like not the thing that people want to do. Can you define and sort of explain more at a theoretical level what are these concepts of scarcity and abundance? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it can be pushed and pulled to many areas, but there is both when are you in a scarce system versus an abundant system. And then there is when are you in a scarce mindset versus an abundant mindset. And the two have correlation. It's much easier to have an abundant mindset in an abundant system.
Yeah.
But perhaps I'll actually start with the book that really brought this to front of mind for me, and that was Cradle to Cradle. So many decades ago.
Like literally.
Like literally. I describe the book for engineers. I describe it as lean thinking in an environmental context. And lean thinking is a framework that came out of the Toyota management system. We
Literally
use it a lot decades ago. And it was a way to say, how can you have a look at a whole system and understand value through the entire chain rather than just trying to optimize one little bit of it? And the environmental movements that have shaped society in many ways have gone through trends. So there was a book that was, I think it was 1968 or so, quite a long time ago. And that book was The Population Bomb. And this was a prediction that we were about to head up against the maximum number of people that the world could sustain. And there was about to be enormous famine, enormous disruption, enormous everything. So it was very much a scarcity mindset framing for the environmental movement that grew through the 70s a lot. And that movement basically said the world can only sustain so many humans. We're about to run out of resources, everything. Now, what that book didn't foresee, so at that time, I think it would have been 3.5 billion people or something as the world's population. We're now past 8 billion. That while we still have famine, while we still have hunger, it is a continually reducing amount as a percentage of humans. And so something happened there where their predictions did not come to pass.
And I mean, that feels crazy topical now because there's so much discussion about the fact that we're not in a population boom situation anymore. So you know, you've got this prediction about population booming and being too much to sustain, and then sort of a miss in what kind of technologies might come along to actually make it sustainable. And that's maybe like systemic, right? And then you've perhaps got this mindset miss, which is actually maybe people won't want to have as many children as they have in the past, and we're going to have a totally different issue.
Absolutely. And so they couldn't foresee the Green Revolution, which was a whole change in how food crops were farmed, using more science, using fertilizers, using other things that radically increase productivity. Of course, there's been downsides to that as well, but the net result has been way higher yields, technologies that allowed us to begin farming areas we'd never farmed before, many technological changes, as well as an understanding that the total amount of energy on the earth is not the same. Solar power keeps landing. And so even now it's very topical as we're moving our systems away from these fossil fuel derived energy sources into solar derived energy sources. You know, more than 10,000 times the amount of energy that humans consume in all sources together is landing on the earth in the form of solar energy, right? So
that's so powerful.
This is
that
escape
idea.
The system that you are currently being constrained by, and you might be able to unlock a new abundant system that has more than we realized.
And actually, it's sort of, so coming into this, first thought was that like scarcity mindset, bad, abundance mindset, good. But actually, there's something really powerful about having a scarcity lens that you know how to turn on to say fossil fuels are a scarcity concept. They were formed some time ago.
Millions of years.
Many more than a few decades. And once they're gone, they're gone. And it's really good to know that and to have a scarcity concept so that you can say, this is not a self-regenerating system. It is a system like inherently scarce. And so the abundant thought is we need to find a new system. And even the sun ultimately is a scarcity system, but it's a long way away from our own concept of
and
time
this is exactly
duration.
right. So you used to be able to have a fire, convert these like cellulose structures that have been, capturing energy over decades.
Trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Just checking. Yeah.
Photosynthesis is this incredible conversion. You used to be able to push fire smoke out, and when no one else was pushing fire smoke out, it sort of, you weren't hitting the edges of the system. So it was fine. Just as if you moved into a forest and cut down trees, you weren't going to hit the edges of that system.
You could be one family in a forest, and in your lifetime, you couldn't cut down enough trees to impact the forest.
Exactly that. Where once population grows, once townships begin gathering and sucking in energy sources from around them, you start hitting the edge of the system.
Yeah.
And this is why I quite like beginning the conversation around scarcity and abundance in systems thinking, because it's very real things that make a very real difference. So that book I mentioned, Cradle to Cradle, one of the most beautiful analogies they had in that was the cherry blossom. And they made the point that, once a year, twice in certain species, you have this abundant blossoming, flowering that is only around for some weeks. Some species it's even less than. It's this huge, abundant display of color and smell and scent and everything, and it falls from the tree, hits the ground, soak back in, the nutrients are broken down, biological life does its work. And because the system is circular or regenerative, you can still have abundance so long as the system can capture that back and then regrow it into nutrient that provides the new stock for everything else and next year's wonderful abundant display. And so often beginning on a system, it's like if you believe you are trapped by a scarce system, for you to have something, someone else must be without.
Yeah.
And
because actually the thing I wanted to say just briefly about the cherry blossom concept that you introduced is that, yes, for a moment, the trees display this incredible abundance. But actually, when I think about that tree and that cycle, it feels like a scarce system. It's limited in its ability to reproduce, and it's quite physically contained, and the replication of it is quite challenging. And that it feels like within this very neat system, it creates this moment of beautiful abundance. But from just one step away from the system observing it, it's quite limited in how many people can enjoy it and the implications on it. If 1,000 people wanted to all enjoy that one tree, it doesn't work anymore and it sort of gets broken. So I think this idea of how many people can benefit from the thing and how does that work? So in the tree or under the tree, you could have a sense of abundance within the system. Just like one family within a forest, the trees would feel incredibly abundant. But when we think about our populations interacting with forests for fuel, today this feels very scarce. So there's something quite interesting going on around the perspective that you're taking and looking at the system from.
Absolutely. And so I don't think there is any system that is infinitely abundant.
Mm-hmm.
But what we have to do is look at the system we're working with and say, is there still abundance there that can be leveraged in a way that can continue to be more productive, more vibrant, more useful? But at what point will we begin pushing up against the edges where it then comes back and starts, all of the negative sides of leveraging that system start to push back at you heavily? And so the world can absorb certain amounts of carbon dioxide increases, methane emissions, other things. But once it's happening so much, you start pushing up against the edges of what the rest of the planet can absorb and hold and deal with, and it starts pushing back and creating these very negative effects.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
And actually the thing I interrupted though, which I did want to hear, was you were starting to talk about how many people can enjoy the benefits of the system.
One of the things I also think, though, is, at Bellroy, we talk about our stewardship loop, which is this notion that to understand a system, you need to understand the major interactions and influences in that system. And in our stewardship loop, we talk about humans, animals, and the planet. And the idea is if you only think about one of those stakeholders, you will miss understanding how the system actually works together. So, the cherry blossom, it's like you've got to understand flora and fauna. You've got to understand soil health and colonies. You've got to understand what insects and vibrant things are doing there to other ones. If a cherry blossom was on its own, it would never be able to evolve and improve. And so it's actually part of the blossom attracting the right insects, attracting the right things. So in this systems thinking, it can be a real trap to only ever think of one of the major players in the system. Mm-hmm. And I think often as we've made progress in science and theory, we've often made progress only really focusing on parts of the system that feel legible, that feel understandable, and we miss all the other stuff. So, in nutrition, we all thought about the mechanics of how our body breaks things down without actually understanding the gut flora and fauna and all this extra stuff that's alive and doing these symbiotic operations in us. And so when we're thinking about systems being abundant or scarce and when are we getting close to the edges, if we're only looking at one part of the system, we will totally miss the cue of when we're starting to push up near the edge.
So what do you do when part of the system is very opaque?
Absolutely. I think in some ways, Chesterton's fence is a great saying here of you arrive, there's a fence there on the frontier. You're like, I don't see the reason for this fence. I'm going to take it down. And you don't realize that was to stop the wild buffalo migration trampling your house or doing something else. So it's this notion of a little bit of conservatism to say, don't do wild messing with things until you understand why they were there in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's like in the body, if we say, the appendix is useless, just take it out. Tonsils are useless, take them out.
Yeah.
If you don't yet understand, in some depth or nuance, why that might be there, assume it is still playing a role. That's it's like a little bit of conservatism.
Yeah.
Just to say, do I understand enough of this that I can both at a theoretical and an empirical sort of style of thinking, I can see why these things are together.
Yeah.
So that's one bit of advice.
It's very theorizing based, right? You need to try and sit down and say, what are all of the reasons that this thing might be like this? And then I suppose the magic of trying to make a business work or trying to get a system to work is in working out how do you make the decision anyway?
Yes. Because we can never have full
sometimes you have to
knowledge.
take the fence down.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't understand why it's there and you think you've got really good theories for why it was needed in the past, but perhaps you can take it down now.
Yep, absolutely. And then, a bit of maths is really helpful, right?
Yeah.
So if we're talking about energy systems and we know how long fossil fuels take to concentrate down into their super high potency form of energy, we can have a sense. We'll keep discovering new forms, new placements. We might have technology that's better extracting, but we're already seeing very clear evidence that we can't keep burning fossil fuels at crazy rates because we're seeing the downsides as it pushes into the larger planetary space. We're getting negative consequences coming back and pushing against us. It's funny when you then look at projections for solar power adoption. There's some wonderful graphs from Gapminder and others that describe all these projections like, solar power's been increasing exponentially, but it'll then level off, and and then they redo it 3 years later.
Were you showing me that recently, or because
Yes.
I feel like Matt was as well.
Oh, right. I've recirculated
I feel like
that.
that's come at me twice now.
That's like a little bit of maths to just say, hold on, so many forecasts over the last 30 years have said, yeah, sure, it's going exponentially, but it's about to level off. And it's like, when you understand, okay, more than 10,000 times, some estimates say 20, but I think they were old, more than 10,000 times the amount of energy we consume in all forms are landing in the form of solar.
Yeah.
Solar's just a really good thing, right? That feels like we still have so much abundance left in the system before we start pushing up against the edges.
Yeah.
And of course, the ways we capture that matter. Like, you don't want too many toxins and toxicants released into the world. You don't want all these other things. So you've still got to nurse it. But there's just a really good argument to say, when you look at the trends for what's happening on the cost of coal power, the cost of solar power, the cost of all sorts, when you have a bit of a sense of where the technology's heading, just make the bet on solar. Like, it's not for everything. Sure, you've got to also get your batteries better. Sure, you've got to supplement with some wind and some hydro and some other things. But it's like, have a look at the system. Can you, a bit of back of envelope stuff, say, how much room does it look like it's here is still left in the abundance? And at what point, if we start to push up against the edges of this system, what will the early warnings be?
So the thing I was going to talk about, I mean, we both have spent a lot of time reading Charlie Munger's wisdom. And I think one of the ideas that is sort of a meta idea from him, or sort of emerges from him, is the importance of having models of models,
yes,
for want of a better term, right? You know, he very much had ideas about how people work, and ideas about how money flows, and ideas about how to navigate resources, and, you know, thinking about, well, if you have to make a bet on solar, and, you know, this is analogous to if you have to make a bet on the luggage range or whatever thing you're making a bet on. I think what that process for knocking down Chesterton's fence looks like is, how can you channel and funnel as many models as possible to understand how the world is interacting with this piece. So how might the humans around the fence be feeling?
Yeah.
And how might the ecosystem around the fence be feeling? And what might the economic implications be? And where might the incentives lie? And that something like being good at theorizing about, are you in a scarcity system or not, and when should you try and bust out of it? You need all those models to mean that you do a good job theorizing, and not like think about it for 5 minutes and you didn't come up with an idea.
Absolutely. And use wonderful friends and networks that are much more calibrated in these spaces. Use modern search techniques, machine learning, other things to do a quick job at getting a sense of what you might be missing.
Yeah.
But those models are definitely, like, you should have multiple models that look at it through different lenses to get a bit of a sense of the major pieces at play.
Yeah.
And I'm aware we've sort of begun this more in an environmental
I was sort of going to say,
space.
let's kind of keep moving business and negotiating and finding solutions and that kind of space.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's us sort of moving into the mindset part of the sort of
I
the
think
concept?
that would be excellent. And perhaps through that we'll talk about some other systems, parts of that. But I think that pivot to mindset would be great.
Well, so the thing that feels really present is that the thing that exists, like if we're sort of thinking about mindset and what do I think is going on, the thing that exists in a scarcity space is that you have one solution to solve the problem. And the thing you're really doing is investing in the solution, backing the solution, optimizing the solution. And like it was actually making me think a bit of theory of constraints, and like, you know, that concept that you have in a scarcity mindset, it's like, it's probably been a good concept, right? It probably was fruitful. It brought about lots of good things. And from a theory of constraints perspective, it makes a lot of sense to subordinate everything else to that concept and really optimize it and have it sort of get every last little drop of value out of the idea. But then at some point you have to open the constraint up, and that from a mindset perspective, it feels like you can stay in the scarcity space for a little while because maybe there's value to be had in a good idea, but you ultimately need to flip to an abundance mindset to be able to find 10 new ideas that could be candidates, maybe some of them rubbish, but could be candidates as a solution to that space. And that it feels like it's really like the abundance space is very solution generative. Okay, so like it feels like in the scarcity space is where you're optimizing, and in the abundance space is where you're like hunting and solution generating.
I think that's generally the right vibe. And I think you even hinted at it where if you're optimizing for one metric, one goal, one thing, there's more chance that you'll sort of end up with inertia going too far into that one thing.
Yeah, like when do you stop once you start optimizing in that direction?
Absolutely. So theory of constraints, you're running a production system for something. If you're so hell-bent on just optimizing around that constraint, you might miss the movement in consumer sentiment. That means that product widget you're making is just no longer relevant.
Kodak, you know.
Yeah, Kodak,
people are not going to be buying films anymore, and you've just invested something dollars in the best filmmaking plant in the world.
Absolutely. And so there are definitely times when recognizing a scarce system and optimizing for it will make sense. And I really liked your point that you generally shouldn't stay too long in that because you're going to start missing all the other bits that need to interact to regenerate, rebuild, evolve, change. You get more static when you're generally in that scarcity framing and scarcity mindset.
As in you get more static, not as in noise, but as in stable, staying still.
Correct.
Like not moving.
Yeah,
static.
It's harder to evolve. And that abundant mindset you described as almost more lateral thinking, creative thinking, that is often like remove the blinkers and start to be able to have more inputs, because I think there's very few goals in life that are singular goals with no other goal around it that don't break everything else in the process, right? Like we saw it with businesses that only wanted to optimize for profit and broke everything else in the process. Those do not become the beloved generational companies, the businesses that serve multiple stakeholders and do all sorts. They kind of eat themselves alive because they've only got one goal, and to do that, you have to put the blinkers on. You have to start ignoring a whole lot of rich detail and sense and awareness coming in around to be so singular in a focus. But there are certainly times when the reality is that the thing you're going at is a scarce system. So if you're trying to sell your house, you only have one house in your lifetime. Generally, if the other person pays less, you get less. If the other person pays more, you get more. It can be a bit of a win-lose in a negotiation.
Yeah.
But many people then take that sort of sense on every negotiation is a win-lose.
Yeah.
Where, for instance, in Bellroy, it's like we're not driving every different supplier down to get the lowest cost on just that one product, because we know that is optimizing for a very short-term goal, and it has to ignore so many details around.
Yeah.
And in business, in life, there are all these situations where it feels like in the moment you're optimizing for this one thing and you've got this scarce mindset and the pie is one size, and for you to have more, someone else has to have less.
That was the thing from before, was the size of the pie. So, anyhow,
we should have started with this, but one of the easiest ways to describe scarcity versus abundance is: are you carving up a set size pie?
Yep.
Or are you growing the pie?
Yep.
Can you create more pie? Can you create mini pies? Can you create different flavors of pie?
Yeah.
So I think what we see in a mindset is often the schools of experience we've come through, whether that's the social groups we're in or the profession we've begun our life in or the study we've done. There are often areas that tend towards scarcity mindset or areas that tend towards abundance mindset.
Yeah.
And so, if you're growing up in a Mad Max world where technology is broken apart, there are only set resources that you don't know how to build again or how to regenerate, then for you to have that gadget, that weapon, that thing, someone else can't, that is kind of a scarce system.
Yeah.
Some folks are raised in that in their formative years, and it's very hard for them to understand abundance and understand that productivity can be increased. We can grow the pie. We can have new forms of nutrition that aren't just pie. We can do all these other things. And so I think some folks tend to begin a bit more in a scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset according to their upbringing and their formative years and those around them and what they studied or how they worked or those things. But almost always it feels easier to have collaboration and love in an abundant mindset and an abundant environment. And I think even if we think of many forms of competition, like if you are competing just for the Olympic gold medal, that is a very scarce resource. And so you could imagine dedicating years in pursuit of that one Olympic gold medal for women's 1,500 meter track, right? There's only one of those every 4 years. That is a scarce system. It is very difficult, if that is the only goal you have framed, to have a vibrant, happy life if you miss out on that. You fall sick the day before, you don't quite do the work, someone comes out of the blue and pips you, right?
Yeah.
And even in athletes that are competing for the same scarce thing, you can still see athletes that come at it through abundance and they're like, what sorts of goals could I have where even if I don't get that one gold medal at the Olympics, I will still be so stoked.
Yeah.
And this is, loving the journey rather than destination. This is a whole bunch of psychology about how do you really see the growth and the improvement, and that's your reward. How do you notice all the relationships you're building and all the struggle you're going through and the sense of pride, and how do you create all these little wins along the way where you're increasing the winning elements that you can attain rather than just going after a singular thing. So we see lots of environments, hyper competitive, going after this one, that's the only sense of satisfaction. I want to be the richest person in the world, right? And for anyone that follows those things, good luck. Even those people will be richest person in the world for a week or two, and then the shares dive, and then they won't. And you're just like, whoa, like even the way we frame the goals we go after and the progress we seek, you can take an abundant setting to that.
And you know what, though? What I didn't think I was going to think at the end of this, but actually I feel like I think a little bit more, is I think I came into this holding all of the love for the abundance side of the equation and all of the things that you've said, and thinking it's just always better, and scarcity is sort of this miserable place and it blocks your mind and you can't find ideas. But actually I'm coming out of the conversation thinking, no, but the thing about a scarcity mindset is it focuses the mind on how the world looks right now. And the abundance mindset is beautiful, and it brings options and solutions and a counter to not having the 1,500 meter gold medal as your only objective. Like, it does all of those things. But actually I was a little bit imagining something that I've often felt a little bit frustrated by, of people kind of skipping, going from like their teenage years to their I want to be an entrepreneur years, and like being overabundant with all of the things they might create, but sort of never sitting down and looking at the world and saying, but what is the world now? And like, what are the things I want to optimize for now? And so interestingly, I feel like I'm kind of coming out of this thinking, oh, you actually really need both mindsets, and they both bring a lot of power. I think they work over very different time horizons in different ways, and that the real risk with the scarcity mindset is that you stay in one space for too long when it's time for you to cut. And so, when you're going from like 1 to 80% and then to 90%, the scarcity mindset might be quite fruitful because actually you can really improve your running time or your wealth by doing sort of 1 to 80% of the things that work. And like going from 80 to 90%, that's going to take more effort to get out. I think there's some numbers on this, like for strength training, where like 2 times a week of training an hour really is getting you from like 0 to 80%. And then I think the third one, I'm a bit making up the numbers, but is something like it gets you from 80 to 90%, but you had to increase your time by 50% for like, an 8% benefit,
an asymptoting return.
And then to get from 90 to 100, I mean, you really better want that thing because the time that you might need to put in like another 4 hours or 5 or 10 hours a week to hardly get any extra benefit. And that the thing about the scarcity space is that it really could focus the mind, but the risk is that you stay for too long and put in effort when actually it's time to cut and move. Whereas the abundance mindset really makes me think you can just keep hunting all day, right? And keep like making this pie and that pie and that pie, but kind of never eat the pie in front of you that's already made and really valuable. And so I didn't expect to be thinking this, but I noticed that.
So it feels a bit like abundance in that sort of divergent thinking and then scarcity in that convergent thinking.
Yeah.
But also we have enormous problems when we take an abundance mindset into a scarce system that is genuinely scarce.
Right.
So there are many people that say, well, our forefathers and mothers all cut down trees. Why can't we keep doing it at random? Or, but humankind has been burning these fuels for 200, 300 years. Why can't we still do it? So it's like, well, we reach the edges of that system.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea of both what system are you operating in and do you have to stay in that system or can you reinvent the system, right? Yeah. But then what mindset are you bringing to it?
Yeah.
And I really agree that notion of this focusing, convergent, like bring into the thing, because there are times when one goal should take over every other goal. If your kid's running towards the road, there is only one goal you have in life.
You can do anything.
You'll do anything, right? So I think
maybe not anyway. Yeah. You get the point though.
I think it's that they both have validity and it is both the mindset and the system that you're actually operating in that will help determine fitness for purpose. Like what is the right one to be adopting here and understanding.
And there's probably something about human nature that I think society, it's like big claim, but anyway, society rewards the fruits of the scarcity labor and pushes a little bit more in that direction and probably doesn't quite know how to reward the abundance endeavours in quite the same way. I think if you imagine the school system, so because it's like, well, why is this interesting or why are we talking about this? I think in a schooling system, as we sort of have all experienced it, I think the abundance thinking is often not rewarded and not sure how to be judged. I think if you take an abundance approach to an assignment, you could well not hit the mark sheet and flunk, versus a very singular convergent style of thinking is the one that you kind of get an A+ for. Not everywhere, but it feels like the push is interesting because I think we are all a little bit more pushed to optimize, to converge our thinking, to do the thing that everybody knows works. And if you're kind of trying to be out there creating a business or creating a new thing or like proposing the negotiation approach that isn't the one that the books say you should take, then you're the one carrying the burden of the odd approach, and you need the structure intellectually to find a place to do that.
I think that's right. It's a bit like the old better to fail conventionally than succeed unconventionally.
Buying IBM, right?
Yeah, there's still a lot of hesitation about moving out beyond what is legible, what is known, what has been proven. And again, optimum is not at either of these extremes, right? It's like we have to keep doing it this way. It's the way we've always done it, versus Chesterton's fence, just throw it all out, burn it all and start again. It's like neither of those ways is right.
Yeah. Okay, thinking about time.
Excellent.
If we, like, what have we missed? If there was anything else we needed to cover, what do you think is missing in the conversation?
I think some sort of practical takeaways, right? So there might be a series of things that just, if you start to notice, like, are people fighting over the pie as if it's a fixed size? Am I in a hyper-competitive environment where there's only one form of success? Am I really risk-averse and really scared of any form of failure because it's like that it's probably sort of a scarce thing. Like, you only have one go at this.
There's no other path.
There's no other path. These are all sort of below the line, like negative states that, if you notice, it might be you're assuming that this system is a scarce system, and you're assuming there's only one amount of pie to be carved up.
Yeah.
And actually that might be a point to stop and say, hold on. Could I escape this scarce system? Is there a new abundant system I could move into? Is there something else that reduces that hyper-competitive, only one form of success, only one thing? Like, that is something that, if you just are more aware of it, or more aware of watching others really battling as if every negotiation is a win-loss, then it just starts to open you up to that idea that, hold on, the thinking might be a bit blinkered right now.
If we're talking about like actions, then I think then I would also add, like, they feel a little bit like the away goals actions of, like, what can you notice is potentially happening and move off from that. And then I would add, how can you make yourself into someone who can generate in the abundance context? And I think, how can you build a process for thinking that knows how to explore ideas, and a process for building on your base knowledge. So when you're trying to decide what world are you in, you have the context to build that out.
I like that a lot.
Is that a good wrap-up spot?
It's themes that could be pushed and pulled in so many ways, but hopefully that's been interesting just to see it. I think we are seeing society start to discuss this a bit more, because we're pushing up against the edges of systems at the moment. Keen to see if it is helpful.
Awesome. I have one extra.
Yes.
It occurred to me partway through our conversation that something quite interesting has happened just recently, where you and I have both, within the period of like a month, read 2 of the same books.
Oh, yes.
Which I don't think would happen very often.
Yes.
One of them is The Chairman's Lounge about Qantas, and the other one is Project Hail Mary. And I was thinking to myself, I'm very keen to hear what you thought about Project Hail Mary, which...
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I thought these are 2 quite interesting books for this group. And so I wondered if this would be a little interesting outtake for us to potentially record.
So Project Hail Mary, Lina's recommendation, I sometimes have to drive a bit. And when driving, often I'm listening to sort of non-fiction, factual, educational books, but by the time you're driving at night and it's kind of feeling a bit tired after a big day, it's like you want something a bit more involving. Project Hail Mary is like, it is geek nourishment for like... How amazing would it be if you were a scientist, engineer, creative problem solver, flying out into the far distant galaxies to try and save humankind? Like, what would you do? And I've just absolutely loved the book. And it's a book that I can imagine some people would just be like, what?
Yeah.
You think reading this or listening to this is fun? Are you for real?
So, but the interesting thing is that the recommendation came to me from someone who really reads literature
Yep.
and is very sort of into English, and she recommended it to me. And I sort of thought, oh, isn't it fascinating that I think
Oh, it might be a broader appeal than I realized.
that's why I kind of wanted to say, oh, it might be broad. Now, I think the thing that's interesting is that once I was halfway through it, I realized this is being turned into a film starring Ryan Reynolds, I think. And so I'm not sure what the world's going to do with it, and I haven't digested any content on that. So we kind of get our little opportunity to talk about it before the world
but
turns up.
I really do love these ideas of, in good science fiction, you know, you're inventing one new bit of technology and then seeing what changes in the world as a result of that.
Yeah.
And it felt like, is it The Arrival or something?
Yeah.
That beautiful movie and book from some time ago of that first contact and what does that look like. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I was just lost in it and kind of going.
Like, I didn't really imagine the connection. The abundance mindset thinking in the book, like, because actually the context is incredibly scarce.
Yes.
For reasons. And the context that he wakes up in, if we just describe it like that, is so scarce.
Yes.
And it's probably a series of 1,000 abundance framing decisions that lead to an incredible outcome that is so delightful to watch. So I think one of the reasons I loved this book and found it energizing and kind of wanted to talk about it was because I felt like I got energy from every problem they solved.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, amazing. Like, imagine you just thought about your problems in life. Like when you're about to die on a spaceship, you probably really focus your brain on like, I need to hunt for a solution here. But like when your day's just a bit shit, you kind of don't focus your brain on solving that problem in the same way. And the thing I loved about this book is how energized I felt to like live my life trying to like fix things and find better solutions.
Yeah, not just accept a very constrained view of outcome.
Yeah, you know, you feel a bit crummy and it's like, well, why? Or you don't sleep well and you're like, well, why? How do I fix this problem? I mean, the thing that just warmed my heart so much, and I'm trying to actually have this conversation without spoiling the book, but like, I loved so much the you sleep now. Like, it was so just hell yes, correct answer, go and sleep now. This is like exactly what you have to do.
Yep.
So if we then think of the other book and think about Scarcity and Abundance mindset, like how crazy are these two books as examples?
So the Chairman's Lounge is again, it's one journalist's view of a whole series of things that happened with Australia's national carrier, Qantas,
the flying kangaroo.
The flying kangaroo, and it, in some ways, it was like Australia's little debrief of, like, was this a bit like an Enron, only not as full on?
An Enron that sort of didn't accidentally go all the way to the end.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what sorts of incentives were at play and what sorts of safety nets were at play and where do incentives change people's behaviours? And, you know, it'd be great to now read the counter for someone that feels like value wasn't destroyed over that era. But
I don't think we're going to get that book.
We
might.
We might, you know. Yeah. But it's an airline that many Australians love deeply and
we
want.
We really do.
It's meaningful.
Want it to work.
It's meaningful. And we all want it to work.
You know, if you had to make a list of the best campaigns of all time,
I still call Australia home.
The kids singing in the red centre, like you could almost make a tear come into the corner of your eye as you imagine how stirring that is and how much value that brand held and actually will continue to hold.
Will recover, will get back to a good space again. Australia will demand it.
Yeah, I think so.
But absolutely. So two fascinating books, very, very different senses.
It feels like there were decisions made that weren't doing the thing you talked about at the start of the podcast, which is thinking about all of the stakeholders. I think the thing that, because, we were running Bellroy during COVID and within an Australian government context, and the thing I felt like I really enjoyed or got my brain turning was hearing about the government policies that were coming out, listening to the journalists describe them, listening to the description of how Qantas interacted with them, and then remembering what we did at Bellroy at that time. And so that felt really interesting. And I think it's easy, joyfully, from a 2025 perspective to have started to have forgotten some of the challenges of March and April 2020 in decision making, when I think some of Qantas's decisions felt a lot more singular than I think they potentially needed to be. But it was so interesting to kind of watch a book very much run over the period that Bellroy ran in and kind of contrast and remember our thinking at the same time. So, yeah, two super interesting books.
Absolutely.
I think if you could only read one, I'm going to go with Project Helmet.
Yeah, I think you leave that one feeling better about the world.
But maybe you learn
potential.
some pretty big lessons in the Chairman's Lounge.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. Done. Awesome.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.